Welcome, everyone, to this call of the Accounting Alchemy Network. So excited to get to talk with Liz Olson today, Reverend Liz Olson,
Yeah.
and build some amazing tools for resilience in climate crisis, as well as, other big kind of meta crisis things that might have us feeling overwhelmed in today's world. And to start us off, before tossing it to Liz, we wanted to do just a quick check-in prompt, which I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat. And feel free to respond in the chat with whichever of these inspires you. You don't have to answer all of them. Your name, pronouns, location, maybe what inspired you to join us today, what changes in the climate you've noticed or experienced where you are in your area, and what is your internal weather today? So, how you are feeling. And just take a moment to respond in the chat when you have a chance to do that. And I'm going to toss it to you, Liz. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. And I just want to give people a minute to do that because it's hard for me to be talking while you're thinking about, what is my internal weather today?
Yeah.
I want you, because we're going to be talking about, mental health and emotions and feelings and hopefully developing some tools for ourselves for tapping in. So that's just a little, you know, exercise to get us just checking in what's my internal weather today.
Yes.
And as far as what changes you're seeing in the weather, in the climate, and where you're at, it can be where you're at or places that are beloved to you, like where you grew up or a favorite place you like to go. Like, have is there still snow, or is there less snow for skiing, or is there summers are so unbearably hot I can't go for a walk outside until it's October, or just whatever. What changes have you seen in your favorite places?
Some great stuff coming through in the chat. Thank you.
uh, of our lyceums.
Yeah, I know for myself, the place where I am here in Southern Oregon has become a lot drier since I moved here 21 years ago. And it's been really interesting to actively watch the climate changing and really feel into the difference in rainfall that our region has actually been reclassified to be a desert. So desertification is happening here. And that's in large part a result directly of the deforestation and overgrazing that's been happening here for um, the last 150 plus years.
Thanks for these responses. And yeah, I mean, there's just the immediate weather changes, right? Where here we are moving into fall, and what that means, rainy season or cooling. And and yeah, just kind of coming here today, it looks like Alina is kind of in a neutral place. And a little Stacy, a little cloudy today. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And my heart always opens up when I get to be around other people and be talking like this way, so I can feel that heart opening. And I also always feel a little bit of nervousness because I'm presenting. Full disclosure. Okay. All right. Why don't we go ahead and dive into the presentation? This is going to be me talking for a little bit. We're going to start with me talking for a little bit, and then we're going to um, allow for some questions and answers, and uh, then we're going to do a little exercise for tapping into where we are ourselves with how we're feeling about things. Okay, so there's going to be a little bit of time for that. And we can go, you can always go as slow or deep as you want, wherever you are today. Okay. So, my presentation is about how these climate crises are affecting our mental health and what we can do about it. And so, like, well, okay, why should we even be concerned about our mental health, right? And this is true, at the UN COP meetings and a lot of these formal international gatherings, they really haven't been talking about mental health until the last couple of years. But in fact, when we have disasters, we're seeing that for every one case of physical injury, there's 40 cases of psychological trauma. It's unseen, so we're not talking about it. We don't see it so readily. But we've also heard from surveys that 1 in 10 Americans are having anxiety and depression, specifically about our global warming. That's a lot of people. And it's important to look at this because how our mental wellness is going to dictate how we move forward with having the capacity for imagination for finding solutions and the inner capacity for adapting as we go through it. Are we going to go through kicking and screaming? Or are we going to go through mindfully caring for each other and attending to our own needs? It kind of breaks down to three main areas of impacts on our mental health. One would be those direct impacts when we have extreme weather events. Second would be direct impacts that are happening with these chronic changes that are happening over time. And then third would be sort of indirect impacts, which most notably would be described as climate anxiety. Here's a really gnarly graph that maps it out. But basically, again, we're talking about increased global temperatures that are causing these extreme weather events. And so there's these immediate impacts, losses to our homes and to our agriculture, to the natural world, loss of life. And of course, these have these longer term direct impacts where our systems and our communities are disrupted. There's loss of livelihoods. And so then there's forced migration. People want to move to a different place that's safer, and communities have breakdowns. And all these things don't happen without us being affected in our mental well-being. They affect us emotionally, right? So we're seeing not only individual grief and loss, we're seeing whole communities kind of breaking down. We're having more PTSD and trauma, and we're seeing more suicide. Okay, so that's the direct impacts. The indirect impacts are when we're witnessing changes to the landscapes, to our communities. We're not experiencing it ourselves, but maybe we read about them in our news. How can we not be affected by all the hurricanes and disruption we've just been hearing about? I mean, it's just like, oh my God. So that affects us indirectly. Okay, and those cause the eco-anxiety or the climate grief. These are some words we're going to talk about, or something called solastalgia. Okay. So let's talk about the direct impacts from extreme weather disasters. And I'm going to give the example of the Alameda fire that came through where Ingrid and I have been. I've just recently relocated, but I've been living up in Southern Oregon. And this was in 2020 on September 8th, when it was very dry, very windy, and a spark ignited and tore through 3 different communities. I want to say something about you, even when the disaster is upon you, you just can't believe it's going to affect you. And I experienced that, and I was almost relieved to hear a fellow from Maui talking about it as well. I was like, that's exactly what I experienced. I saw this huge black plume of smoke, massive, but I couldn't even believe that that fire was coming my way. My coworkers point, I was at the work, I worked at a hospital. Hey, Liz, that's coming from your direction. Do you want to go home and take care of things? Really? Well, because we have smoke from fires. I'm like, well, okay, I guess. I couldn't believe it was going to come through our town. And there I was in gridlock trying to move on the highway that was already, our major highway was closed, Interstate 5, and then our small highway was closed right after I was able to get off it. Now, the fire didn't come as far back as where I was living in our town. It took out about 40% of our town. But even when I'm evacuating and I'm heading out and I'm parked there and I'm kind of looking beyond into the hub of the town, I still don't think, I'm not seeing the flames. I'm just seeing intense smoke and hearing these popping sounds. And I still don't think it's going through our town. I think it's on the other side of the highway. So I just want to say that because it's so hard for us to believe it, that we're actually going to be impacted. When these events happen, people really rally together, and there is a lot of shock, fear, disbelief. Much of the time, over time, people will work through it. But there's about a fifth of the people, the victims who go through it, who are severely affected during it and post disaster. Even when I've been preparing this material, I can feel the anxiety rise in me. So it stays in the body. And many of our first responders are affected. Aaron Bustard is the captain for the Jackson County Fire, and he said his firefighters said, all of us felt so bad about what happened. We felt almost like we failed. And he recalled, I'd ask, when are the resources getting here? And we were told, there's nothing coming. And this was due to the fact that there were multiple fires going on that day in the state of Oregon. This was extremely stressful and challenging for the firefighters. And fortunately, as afterwards, they had access to mental health resources to help them navigate the intense emotional experience they had. By the third day, our highest need at the evacuation center was mental and spiritual health services, says Miria Alicia of the Coalition Fortaleza, which was developed after our fire to support people with the low-income housing that was burned down. So after that immediate survival and making sure you're in a safe place, then there's all sorts of emotional stuff that's starting to come out, and people are needing that kind of support. Okay. So on to the next sort of category, where we're chronic climate change stressors. So rather than just a disaster that happens, there's these chronic changes that are happening, such as heat, drought, and insecurity about our water, about our food, and the change in our air quality. So to look at one example of that, we'll look at a couple. Heat. So the body, our body, and Stacy, maybe you know about this, generates adrenaline in response to heat. That helps us to regulate our system. But more adrenaline also causes more aggression. And studies have shown that there's increased hate on social media when it's hotter, also when it's colder, interestingly. There is an increase in violent crime, increase in strikes, and there is increase in armed conflict. So when we look at drought, some of the people who are severely affected are the farmers and the food producers. And we're fortunate in Oregon that we have some people with the Oregon State University Extension, Maud Powell and Courtney Olcott. They've been creating programs to provide support and climate resilience for the farmers. Helping them to process the feelings that they're having because of the loss of their livelihood and the difficulty they're having. In their surveys with them, they found that worry was the number one stress that they're dealing with. 92% are experiencing that. And the other one is sadness at the losses that they're having. So let's look at some of those indirect impacts, right? When it's not a disaster, something directly affecting us. Eco-anxiety and climate grief. There was a pretty good study in 2022 on this that found that there's 5 key themes: worry for future generations, worry about apocalyptic futures, despair and rage at the perceived lack of response to climate change, competing worries, meaning I have so many things going on in my life, I can't even think about climate change. And then worry about threats to our livelihood. How are we going to survive? Our jobs are being impacted and changed. Okay. And I want to look at something called ecological grief or eco grief. So, ecological grief is sort of simply defined as the sense of loss that arises from experiencing or learning about environmental destruction and climate change. For people who work in the area of grief support, they've been seeing that there's all these nuanced ways of describing the kinds of grief we're experiencing, such as disenfranchised grief is one of them. So this is a term that was coined by Kenneth Doka, and it's called, sort of the taboo grief. So you don't really talk about this grief, whatever. It could be the death of someone who's beloved to you. You can't really talk about that in your social circle because, maybe it was your gay partner or something like that. But this is what's happening with, say, you're feeling just despair over the loss of our species. It's really hard to talk about that with your friends or in social gatherings. So it's kept inside. Complex or complicated grief. This is when people might take a deep dive and look at the climate situation, or frontline people, scientists, people working in the field and tracking the changes. They can hit a real pit of despair place that's really hard to get out of, and they may have to just kind of pull away from everything for a while until they kind of find ways to step forward. And there are ways to step forward when you get into that place, but that's a complex grief. And there's cumulative grief, and we experience this in our personal lives where there's just like one loss after another. Some people go through a string of deaths or losses in their families, and it's just like you can't even finish processing the loss of one, and then another one comes along. And that's sort of, what it's like with climate change, but also a lot of our other social poly crises going on. It's just so much loss. It's just hard to process all of that cumulative grief. And then there's anticipatory grief. This is sort of a normal emotion that we have when we know a loved one is going to be dying. And so we start having the grief already. And this is certainly true as people are watching the changes about to happen in their area. I can understand how people would say, why would we even spend time looking at the grief? Because it's so painful. Why would I want to take time to look at that? And it's like any sort of processing or therapy, that when we face what's bothering us, you got to heal it. You got to peel it to heal it, and feel it to heal it. Same thing. There's a climate psychologist named Rosemary Randall who she wrote this early influential article on climate uh, change and loss, and she stressed that we have to find ways and spaces to express these emotions. Otherwise, we will suffer the consequences of unprocessed grief. And she looked at this model by William Worden called the Four Tasks of Grief, or grieving and mourning. Um, and what he said happens when we have unprocessed grief, we experience denial of the facts, denial of the meaning of the loss. We can experience shutting off of all of our emotion. We can idealize what is lost. Oh, it was so great back then. Um, and we can do numbing through substance abuse or kind of manic busyness so that we don't feel our feelings. And then just not adapting, becoming helpless, bitter, angry, depressed, and withdrawing. So these are things that can happen when we don't just take a look at how we're being impacted. There's lots of climate emotions. There's been lots of really good work on it. And emotions like anger and grief and fear and indignation, they can actually be motivating emotions. Like, I am going to do something about this, right? And it gets people to start doing something and to get engaged in responding. And then with that engagement and working with others, there can come a sense of joy, even, people are saying, and a sense of hope, a sense of well-being. So there's a whole range of feelings that are coming, that relating to the changes in our climate. I just want to say something too, is that there's nothing pathological about all these feelings, right? These feelings are a normal responses to an abnormal situation. And it's feelings that we're all experiencing, whether we are taking the time to acknowledge them or not. No one is alone in experiencing these feelings. Okay, and then there was also that word solastalgia that I just want to, you may hear about it from time to time. This is a word that was created by Glenn Albrecht, an Australian scholar, who describes it as this disruptive psychological responses that we have presented by people exposed to environmental degradation. So solastalgia is just coming from, these Greek words of pain and suffering and grief. I want to talk a little bit about whose mental health is especially affected. We're all affected, but there are some who are really feeling compounded effects. And so this is from the American Psychological Association. And in the middle of this graph of mental health, physical health, and community health, we have these geophysical impacts, right? Our disaster events. And then on this outside circle, it's the people who are experiencing inequities and vulnerabilities. They are the people who tend to be experiencing these impacts the first and the worst. And for them, climate change is what's called a threat multiplier, because they are already experiencing, it could be people who are experiencing mental health issues already, or social isolation. It could be people who are struggling with these stressors from systemic social oppressions or racisms or biases. And it can be children in our younger generations, especially, are being impacted. I want to talk a little more to that. There was a real landmark study that came out in 2021 in the British journal, The Lancet, and they went to 10 different countries, interviewed 10,000 people aged 16 to 25, and have really amazing results and information that came from that. And here's just a couple of the responses. 75% feel that their future is frightening, and 82% feel that people have failed to take care of the planet. 64%, my government is not doing enough about climate change. So, how do we respond and adapt with all of that? That was a lot of heavy stuff that we just looked at. But there's so much that's being done on how do we deal with this? How do we go through this? And in Oregon, the health authority did a pretty deep study into climate change and youth mental health, and they came up with 3 strategies. These apply to all of us at all ages, not just the youth, but that was what their study was on. The first is to create spaces to come together and share feelings about climate change. And even psychologists are saying, yeah, this is not a diagnosable disorder. This is a more of a communal kind of approach for therapy rather than one-on-one. Come together in groups. When we are in groups, I want to look at my note on this. I'll explain more in just a second. All right, second, engage together in making social change. So take action and do it not alone, but do it in groups. Work with other organizations that are making change. And third, nurture a stronger relationship with nature and our physical environment. I love, Stacy, that you were out for a walk this morning and just soaking up some of, our beautiful earth that we're on, and the loss of that connection to our earth and respect for our interdependence is one of the roots of the disasters that we're facing. OHA, Oregon Health Authority, also looked more closely at the power of this social cohesion and developing that, so that we can do 3 things. We can do bonding work, which is just, most people do this already. We bond, we develop relationships with people of like mind, like ideas. But not only that, to do bridging, right? So make a concerted effort where we connect with people that have different views so that we feel some connection to people who are, the other. All right. So changing that dynamic a little bit. And then lastly is linking to people who have some power, socially, whether it's legislatively or just in your community, so that you have a sense of agency in responding to your situation. This building of community is crucial and will be very crucial when different communities are facing disasters of different sorts. This was a sign that someone had put up in the town of Talent, Oregon, after the fires. And in our town and lots of towns who are experiencing disasters, there's what's called mutual aid happening, where people come together and put out supplies, bring in whatever they have to share, and then people who need it come and take that. And different foundations and organizations, of course, help supply those. We also had food delivery programs that the restaurants were involved with. And this was right during COVID. So it was a great boon for the restaurants and a wonderful help to everyone. So social cohesion, building your community. Okay, so we need to develop ways to develop our emotional intelligence, or EQ, right? We have all sorts of other kind of intelligences, but we're just not trained in developing our emotional intelligence. This is what is going to help build our inner resilience to challenges so that we can go through them um, with some clarity and some way of helping to control ourselves and not be overwhelmed. Um, so that study had said to work in groups, and I want to point out that you have a wonderful group right here. This is fantastic that you're that you have this group with Ingrid, and lean into it, use it, and if you want something more specific, there are what's called climate cafes that the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America has developed. There's the Good Grief Network. There's the Work That Reconnects. And if you're in Southern Oregon, Southern Oregon Climate Action now has Sustaining Climate Activists, which was the group that I had started and led for many years. And then the other is to develop your own practice of just sort of compassionately naming what your emotion is in the moment. Oh my gosh, I'm feeling some, woof, man, am I feeling some sadness right here? Okay. All right. Well, what am I needing? What am I needing for that to help that out with? Let's explore that really gently and carefully with yourself. So developing our EQ is going to be really important so to support ourselves going through this, to help us grow and build our resilience. But author Britt Ray, who wrote Generation Dread and has a blog, says there's a defensive purpose to it as well in order to keep from being manipulated. And I wanted to share this important quote from her. And if you want a book to read on it, one book, it would be her book. I would highly recommend. So she says, I'm just going to read her quote. Emotions are the gas you can't smell or see, but that fuel the public circus on social media that allows big tech to cash in. There are active incentives against us handling our emotions well. We can see clearly in the political arena how our lack of emotional intelligence is pulling at the frays of our democracies and our families. All of this requires a high degree of emotional intelligence. We have to practice it, and we need support to do so because it's not innate to all of us. What is more often innate is becoming stressed, rigid, shutting down, projecting blame onto others, and being defensive. Okay, we're going to take a break right here before we move on to just doing a little experiencing of our own. And I'm wondering if there are any questions, and I might stop sharing here, I think, Ingrid, and then I'll go back to sharing in a minute. Any questions, folks, or just thoughts you want to just say out loud?
Yeah, I love this presentation, and full disclosure, this is not the first time I've gotten to see this because I got to see Liz present this for Southern Oregon Climate Action Now here in my area before you moved away, Liz. And it really strikes me how often I see this throughout so many different communities. And I feel like it's important for us to talk about this in the accounting community because so much of what we're doing is very much disenfranchised emotional states. And acknowledging those disenfranchised emotional states amidst a professional environment where we're expected at a certain level to hide our emotions away, and that's not always possible. But yet, if you have emotions amidst a professional environment, it's considered unprofessional, which is dehumanizing. Mm-hmm. Accounting professionals are expected on a certain level to leave their humanity at the door when doing financial things. And that's ignoring the idea that our financial choices are connected to all of this. All of it is connected. Our business decisions, our personal decisions, the way that our businesses and our lives impact our world. And somehow we're supposed to just separate business from our personal lives. and it creates an extremely unhealthy environment that is toxic.
Mm.
And trying to open up these conversations and create a space where we're not just allowed to, but encouraged to bring our whole selves to the table authentically in whatever emotions that we're feeling, and creating space for our humanity, creating space for real authentic connection is a big part of what we're trying to do here at the Accounting Alchemy Network. So I love that you brought up those different forms of grief. And in particular, like, I feel like the disenfranchised grief is an important thing for us to
Mm.
talk about.
Okay. Yeah. Similarly, and I think for a lot of people in their professions, right? And you guys have the demeanor that right that you're supposed to have for your work. Um, Similarly with scientists, they don't talk about a lot of their emotions. And the group I was working with, they were all educators and scientists in the science field. And it's looked down upon. And if you're presenting and you have an emotion because you're just so overwhelmed, you're kind of disregarded after that, right? So it just it's taking us as a society such a long time to honor that whole part of our humanity. I mean, it's just part of our humanity, and we're just ignoring it. So by doing this kind of group, thank you for showing up. It's just like these little changes that we're making, saying, okay, um, I want to show up a little bit differently to whatever extent you want that to be. Or I want to be supportive of my coworker or my boss or my whoever if they have a really difficult moment. I can be present to them for that and normalize it. So you can be a support to other people and allow them to do that too. Okay, we're going to stop talking. Do you guys have any questions or anything you want to say?
I'm
Yeah.
on. Oh, Stacy, you muted again.
Okay.
There you go. Oh, no, then it muted again.
Oh, I see. Okay, how I have to do this. Sorry, on my phone.
Oh,
I was like, I'm not going to go back inside. Um, this is more just an observation, more just a personal challenge, I guess, where I'm at. So, but it's somewhat piggybacking on what you just said, Ingrid, and it's where I'm at in my professional and personal stage at 50, trying to figure out, what my purpose is and the next half of my life. Um, but one of the things that I have also found interesting, somewhat frustrating, coming from the accounting and finance profession is in professional circles, in particular, my own work, I often get left out of the conversations that are around maybe the more creative, emotional, about um, things that aren't accounting and finance, as if, well, you are just accounting and finance, you don't have emotions. and your role is not to get into the weeds of some of these more these conversations that are just not numbers, right? And so I know from, again, speaking for myself solely, is it's an interesting space that I've been in over the last couple of years and trying to navigate. All I know, I was trained, it's my career path, it's what I was educated in, is accounting and finance. But I want to move into this space of doing, doing better, doing good. But I often tend to get left out. And I mean, that's obviously, I need to push harder, but it's been an interesting observation, I guess, and realization as I'm trying to move out of the very business as usual space and into using what I know and what I'm good at to for lack of a better way to say it, um, do something better.
yeah.
Thank you for voicing that, Stacy. I really appreciate that. And I empathize with a lot of what you were just saying. And I know for myself, I went so far as to basically make it part of my brand and really shifting that focus to make it so that we're breaking down those preconceived notions around accounting professionals just being focused on the numbers and the data, and we might as well be, fleshy computers walking around, and reframing some of those ideas. And in our work in the Accounting Alchemy Network, shifting the perspective on accounting overall toward how can we turn accounting into how we account for what we want to be held accountable to, which really ought to be our values and our beliefs. What do we hold as most highly important? Because that's what we need to be measuring. And there are so many things in our world that's more important than money. And yet, you know, in so many of our systems, we are sacrificing life for the almighty dollar. And how do we shift that?
Yeah. I'm wondering if we have just a little bit of time left. Maybe we'll just kind of adjust our plan of the breakout room thing since there's just a few of us here. I want to just show you a couple of tools that I have found helpful. And then one of them is this wheel of possible emotions we're having, and we'll just take a look at that and then just take a minute to see if any of those pop out for us to just, if you feel like sharing, you can. So I'm just going to share my screen again for a quick minute. And okay, so these are some of the resilience tools that I use. This is from Brene Brown, who's a social worker, basically, and she's done a lot of work. You've probably heard of her, but she's created a list of human emotions. I really like her list because for me, it's very important to be able to name your emotions just as a process. It's a calming process, but also it develops your inner understanding and capacity to move through situations. But most of us have a hard time naming it. I do, and I've been doing this work for years. So often, if I have a really bad day, I'll come and I'll look at my list of emotions and I'll say, okay, and it'll pop out. It'll pop out like a little alarm. It's that one right there. And sometimes it surprises the heck out of me. There's usually multiple emotions. So it's very insightful. Another good list is from the Hoffman Institute, and they have a feelings list, and it also shows the body sensations that we can also be experiencing too, because they're in our body. Emotions are a bodily and body chemical event that happens. So, and the other tool is this climate emotions wheel. It's been developed by climate scholar Panu Pikala, along with the Climate Mental Health Network. And this is being used a lot all over our country now. And it's just like another list, but it's done as a wheel. So if you want to just take a minute here to look and see maybe one or two or three that are kind of popping out for you. My experience is that it's like a blaring red light or a horn, or the word intrigues you and you think, oh, that's not me, but you keep going back to it. I'd take a look at that word. So just give you another minute here. And it changes. Every day it changes. Okay. So kind of keep that word in mind, and then word or words. And then just wondering, our just going to open it up. And Alina, if you want to share, great. And if you don't, but I mean, was there a word that popped out for you, maybe surprised you about what's coming up for you as you think about the climate situation?
No, not surprising. I mean, since I'm
Okay.
kind of, in this work a bunch, it's like, and I'm also, this is what I do for my career. So it's like, it's something that
Oh,
I explore pretty much daily.
okay, okay. So where are
But,
you today?
well, I was actually, it's interesting. I was doing some stuff this morning and it wasn't related to the climate, but it was related to, um, I received these like energetic type readings and stuff, and I've noticed that like whenever I receive them, even though they're really just they're not supposed to be like a divination type of thing that this is what's going to happen or whatever. It's just more of like this is where the energy is now. And it seems like every time I receive one of those, I get this feeling of like, oh, what's like when is the shit gonna hit the fan type of thing. Like, when's the shoe gonna drop? And I sense that that is just a pattern that has been for me in the past anyway. It's like, people have teachers, I guess. And for me, it's that one. It's like, for some reason, just thinking that something bad's gonna happen. So, as I was working towards that, I came to a place of being and just recognizing that, you know, I I can get through this in whatever resourceful way possible. So I guess after I looked at the wheel, interest popped out to me, but also worry. So
Did you say interest?
yeah.
Okay. You meaning, and just if I may ask, is that like because of this inquiry process you did with yourself, like, oh, this information's coming through, and so
No,
like,
just interest about like what's possible.
okay,
Possibility. Openness to possibility, I guess. Like
thank you.
I'm surprised that like acceptance or compassion is not on there too.
Yeah, yeah,
That surprised
that's
me, I guess.
yeah. That's what, as you were talking, I thought, oh, it's like an acceptance kind of. You feel this kind of thing, energy coming, and then what I heard was you kind of went through this internal process of like, okay, coming to an acceptance out. No, I'll find a way forward.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of like, oh God, because I do a form of parts work and
Uh-huh.
these parts of myself, they wanted to make sure that I would always be safe and well and healthy and like these kinds of things, right? And um it's understandable. And at the same time, I can't guarantee my safety or well-being. So what can I do about that, right? I can only just step into as observer and presence as much as possible and not live from fear and worry about what could happen. I can't predict the future. And at the same time, there's a lot of clues that tell me what the future might be,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I don't know if Stacy, if you, did you want to share anything?
Um, sure. I think it's a very short-lived, the one that, well, I don't know. It's probably more has to do with a lot of various things, but the one that popped out for me was loneliness, which is a little bit stronger than what I would necessarily. I guess it was a kind of shocked me a little bit. Um, I think it's wrapped in with midlife crisis and other things for me, which is at this stage in my life, look, if I was 30 or 20, my prior years when I was just had all kinds of energy and um, was just an activist and different things. So I think I'm working through that shift, and therefore, what is my purpose now in this stage of my life? So I think that's the one that popped out for me. Um, but I don't necessarily like that word because it makes me, it feels very woe is me, and that is definitely not where I sit. But it definitely was the one that popped out for me. And I think it's loneliness in terms of, maybe it's because I have to figure out what I'm going to do, or I like so many things ahead of me are, I have some different avenues, I have some different things, and therefore it's a decision that, maybe I alone need to make the decision on how, which path I'm going to take forward. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, and thank you for kind of processing it for yourself. I like to do this paired where it's just more private between two people. So thank you for kind of processing that with, four of us here. Yeah, good information for yourself. So what do I need? So this came up. I don't like the word A. B, what do I need? But I also want to mention this trauma psychologist, Duran is his last name, and he I believe it's the right one I'm speaking of, but he talks about not more in an indigenous way, is we don't attach like a word as an identity, that their languages are more verbs. So you say, well, this emotion is moving through me, it's visiting me right now, rather than identifying I have loneliness, because it is like a downer, right? But the spirit of loneliness is passing through me right now. It's coming through me, but it's going to change, and so that we don't lock ourselves into an identity with that emotion. So I just offer that.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I do parts work too, Alina, and so that type of stuff also comes up for me as I look at some of these different things as well.
Great. Well, any last thoughts or words? We're right here.
We're coming to the end of our time together pretty quickly. I guess I just want to one of the things that I noticed looking at the emotion wheel again, because I think we looked at the more expanded version when we did this exercise together a handful of months ago, which wouldn't show up on the slide very well. But just thinking about, without wanting to necessarily put it in a binary or polarized kind of view, I've often heard, are we making decisions out of grief or out of fear, or out of love?
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of, am I in fear or am I in love right now? And, that there's a bit of a choice there. And of course, often we're experiencing both, and there can be very complex emotions where we have a big mix of things. But taking it back to what you were saying about grief earlier, I've often heard in the work that I've done with positive intelligence and Shirzad Shamin, that grief is an expression of love. That it's important for us to grieve the passing of the things that we love from our lives. And I love what you were saying, Stacy, about, the acceptance not really being in there on the wheel, and where's the compassion, where's the acceptance, and that acceptance is part of the cycle of grief. It's the final stage of grief. And just figuring out, how do we get there, and how do we hold people in their humanity and the grief that we're all experiencing amidst the divisive conversations in our polarized political environment, amidst all of this, and just wanting to create spaces where it's safe to have those conversations. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today and imparting your wisdom. This has been great.
It was a pleasure to meet everyone here today. I'm thankful, and no doubt I just hear so much beautiful expression of your place in the world and what you're doing in the world. And it's really, fortifying for me to hear that there's other people out there just like with their consciousness expanding and working for the betterment of ourselves and each other. So thank you so much.
And if any of our members have questions, where might we be able to contact you?
Yeah,
website?
I can do a PDF of those slides for you. It
That would be
has the
great.
last slide has my contact information. Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll do that. A PDF.
All right. Thank you so much, Liz. And thanks
Yeah,
to Alina and Stacy for joining us today. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate
great.
it.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.